Hello, everyone, and many warm welcomes to everyone has joined us today in this conversation on understanding eco-emotions. My name is Hannah, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's session, which is brought to you by Youth and Environment Europe, or YEE, which you might know us as, and it is supported by the European Youth Foundation. So you might already be familiar with terms such as eco-anxiety and eco-emotions that many people are experiencing living in the planetary crisis we are currently facing. Maybe you've also realized that you are experiencing such emotions yourself, and you're wondering how to express them or how to deal with them. Either way, these are topics that we will explore in today's conversation. And in the end, hopefully, we will better understand how mental health and climate change are interconnected. So to help us in understanding this, we have two wonderful speakers that will be leading the conversation today. We have Juni Sinkkonen, who is a psychologist and an eco-emotion expert. She has previously done research on young climate activists and their identities, and she will start her PhD this autumn, so very soon, to further explore how the field of psychology and societal transformations are interrelated. Joining her in this conversation, we have Panu Pihkala, who is a leading expert in the field of eco-emotions. Panu is a professor from the University of Helsinki, and among the very many things he has done, he has written award-winning books on eco-emotions, and he is also hosting the podcast Climate Change and Happiness, which I highly recommend and is also linked in the description below. He is also the mind behind the Climate Emotions Wheel that will also be a topic discussed in today's conversation. So we have some very knowledgeable guests and lots to look forward in today's session. Before giving the floor to them, I want to let you know that this webinar is a part of YE's ongoing project on eco-anxiety. You can keep up to date with this project and also on some more webinars that are upcoming in the next months on our social media, which is also linked in the description below. I will now give the space for Panu and Juni to start their conversation. We will have a Q&A in the end. So if you have any questions that emerge during Juni and Panu's conversation, please write them in the comments below, which I will be keeping an eye on, and then we will get back to them later. So now I just want to give the floor to Juni. You will be leading the conversation together with Panu.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and warmly welcome Panu and everyone who is watching this. So yeah, Panu, how is it going?
Thanks for asking, Juni, and warm welcome also on my behalf to everyone who is listening. So glad to be here discussing this topic.
Great. So in this discussion, we are covering many topics regarding eco-emotions. And firstly, I would really like to ask you, Panu, to start the conversation. As we live in the midst of triple planetary crisis, so climate change, pollution, biodiversity loss. Now, what do these have to do with our psychological experience, our emotions, and mental health?
Yes, that's a big question, and it's not easy, the times in which we are living. And of course, if we take a look at history, we can easily see that there's been times of great trouble before, and currently people around the world are facing quite different circumstances. So, for example, I'm living and working in Helsinki, Finland, which is globally quite safe and enables people to do lots of things. Climate change is starting to have impacts here also, but overall social and psychological and ecological impacts are not as strong as in many other parts of Europe, just to mention this continent and not to mention other places also. So I think that it's very important to recognize that the global state of the world is having an impact on our minds or our body minds, if we use this concept, which nicely links together the body and the mind. I know, Juni, that you've been often discussing and writing about the importance of this intimate connection between the body and mind, and how that's also related to our connections with the wider world, the so-called more than human world, or nature in quotation marks. So that is having an impact on us. It's based on relationality and interconnectedness. There may be various things in the world which cause emotions, including wars and injustices, poverty, and many environmental issues, which sometimes can be local and sometimes more regional or global. So these can be interconnected, and I leave it here for now. But what's on your mind, Juni, when thinking about this?
Yes, indeed. We are living in the middle of a really deep existential crisis for modern humanity. So of course these things are having an impact on us on many levels. And I really like that you brought up this concept of body mind, and I really like to use that one because I also always want to in my work I want to explore the our connection to the more than human world, because the biospheric community, more than human community, that is the our really deepest community that we belong to. So I really appreciate you brought that up. So in the recent years, this topic of climate anxiety and eco-emotions have been discussed and researched increasingly. Why is that? I mean, it's easy to see, but would you like to add on to the previous? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's two apparent reasons. One is that the impacts of the ecological crisis have intensified. So there's also then more psychological impacts and various strong emotions. But the other reason is that there used to be socially constructed silence around the psychological impact of the ecological crisis. And that requires an effort to break. And still, even in Europe, regions and places have great differences in whether this psychological or emotional side of things is discussed at all. It's not easy to do if it hasn't been done before, and I think it's all related to the complex so-called psychosocial dynamics around ecological issues. So by psychosocial, I mean that it's affecting our minds, and social dynamics are greatly affecting the related phenomena. So that's the shorthand psychosocial. And people notice that there are changes, that there are problems, but then people's reactions are widely different. And it has been unfortunately common to try to sort of hide ourselves from the trouble. And that can lead to this socially constructed silence, and to admit that one feels difficult emotions, for example, sadness or helplessness in relation to the state of the world. That's not easy to say. It's also a manifestation of vulnerability, and then the social dynamics of whether it's safe to express that vulnerability also come into play. And luckily, that socially constructed silence has been broken in many places during the last 15 years. And that has enabled this discussion and conversation to grow also.
Yes, thank you. And also this YE's campaign is also a manifestation of this breaking the silence. And I guess just now you talked about also maybe refer to disenfranchised emotions. Would you like to talk a bit more about those?
Yeah, definitely. And before going directly into that, I just want to mention that we are now using the concept emotion in a broad sense, and different languages have different words for emotions and feelings. With Juni, we actually both come from Finland, and in Finnish language we only use one word, tunne, to describe what is in the English language described with emotion and feeling. So we don't make a distinction. There may be various kinds of tunteet. They may be more conscious or not so conscious. They may be very short-lived. Like, for example, you get very angry and annoyed over something in your everyday life, but usually in 10 minutes it gets easier. And that's a bit different than feeling moral outrage for many years because of the injustices related to climate change. So the temporality, so to speak, can be different also. And the manifestations of these emotions also have great variety, but let's come to that a bit later. But disenfranchised means that something is not given a voice or recognition. And the most famous framework related to this is disenfranchised grief, developed by Kenneth Doka, a grief researcher, and that refers to various kinds of grief which are not socially supported or recognized. And sometimes there can be nasty forms of disenfranchised grief where there is use of power. It's not only that it's sort of kept silent, but there may be use of power to silence somebody. And then perhaps we might need also other terms to describe the ethical problems, because this has also unfortunately existed in relation to ecological and climate issues. But it's possible to broaden the concept of disenfranchisement also to other emotions, and the framework of emotion regulation is related to this. It's quite often used in relation to individuals, like how does an individual regulate their emotions, and that again may be more conscious or less conscious. And one of the main points of today's talk actually will be for my behalf to emphasize that I think that both as individuals and as communities, collectives, we need to develop more skills of constructive emotion regulation, and we can come back to that later. But one of the forms of regulation is also trying to escape from the emotions, and for example, anger may end up being disenfranchised, and that brings also to the fore the topic of cultural layers. And if we compare, for example, Finland and France, we notice that the tendency to show moral outrage on the streets, for example, is quite different. So there's emotional norms which come from our cultures, in addition to the ones that we inherit from our childhood families, for example. But Juni, when you think of disenfranchised eco-emotions or climate emotions, what comes into your mind?
Well, for me, lately in Finland, if I take an example, lately in Finland, there's been a lot of discussion about the definition of old growth forests. And the logging companies would really much like to narrow down the definitions so that as much as possible forest could be cut down for profit. So for me, lately, forest grief, and I believe also to many other Finns, has been really present. And I think this is one kind of a disenfranchised emotion in Finland. What do you think about this, Panu?
Yes, I totally agree. And socially contested grief also, very much so. And just during the last 1.5 weeks, there's been a big media discussion in Finland. I don't know whether that has been in the news outside Finland, where a logging company was driving over a stream which had pearl mussels, this sort of, it's not oyster, but mussel, this creature who lives, and they are endangered, and a biologist happened to be there and noticed that they are driving over the mussels, and there was also unethical behavior from the driver including chauvinistic sort of toxic masculinity attitudes. So in Finland, we've just been in the middle of a public discussion where lots of eco-emotions have been voiced, and people have been also voicing environmental grief or ecological grief over the muscles and over the treatment of forests. But very often that is not discussed in the local level. So agreeing with you, Juni, there.
At this point, maybe it would be good to shortly define eco-emotions. Would you like to do that, Panu?
Well, it's a good question whether I'm able to do it very shortly or briefly, but let's try. So emotions have objects. Sometimes they are clear and sometimes less clear. And eco-emotions are emotions which are significantly related to environmental issues. And I use this formulation, significantly related, because there can be many sort of ingredients in our emotional experiences. And many factors have a role there. So, but anyway, sometimes this connection is very clear. For example, if your local forest is cut down and you have appreciated the forest and have had perhaps emotional connections to that forest, it's a grief and the object is quite clear. It's the cutting down of the forest. But then if we think of climate emotions, it's very clear that people have emotions caused by climate change, but then the relation between the object and the emotion might be much more ambient, like feeling sadness about climate change in general, or feeling frustration that the climate politics are so slow and not as ambitious as we would need. So the potential array of objects and combinations of them is much larger in climate emotions. But then again, in the broader environmental sphere, we have problems such as biodiversity loss and extinctions. And again, we may have emotions because of the diminishment or loss of a local species, where the object is more clear, and one may feel worry and sadness because of the decline of bird species in one's country, as I feel, for example, in Finland. So once again, there can be various kinds of objects, but still they are significantly related to these issues.
How about eco-anxiety and climate anxiety? How would you define those?
Yes, those are perhaps the most commonly used eco-emotion words, as already the name of the project which has organized this event testifies. And in Finnish, that's ympäristöahdistus, literally environmental anxiety. And in many languages, it has different forms of eco-ansiedad or eco-anxiety and so on. I think that the word Angst is probably used mostly in German language. So that's anxiety, which is significantly related to ecological issues. That's pretty easy. But then if we take a look at the word anxiety, we notice that in most languages, that's a very broad-ranging word also. So some people, for example, if you're a psychiatrist, you have probably learned to use the word anxiety to refer to quite strong forms of anxiety, sometimes called anxiety states. And if you're just a random non-psychiatric person, for example, in Finland, if something is bothering someone, we might say that something is ahdistaa häntä. It's anxifying him, to use a very rough translation. So in many languages, in the folk use, there is this idea that it doesn't need to be hugely strong anxiety, but it still is anxiety. And part of my scholarly work has been then to explore various forms of anxiety. And then we come to the possibility of strong states that really exists and is a major issue. Then there's a lot of people who sometimes feel stronger worry or, depressive feelings and so on. So it's not constant strong anxiety, but may sometimes peak, for example, when you hear bad news, or even because of the change of seasons and other factors which affect our psychological state. And to mention one last example, there is what emotion researcher Charlie Kurt calls practical anxiety. So he's been going really deep into study of anxiety and has this book, The Anxious Mind, and many articles. And he defines anxiety as emotion, now most strictly speaking of emotions as more intense body-mind happenings. Anxiety as a reaction to some kind of problematic uncertainty from the point of view of the creature who feels anxiety. And so it's not fear, but it's closely related that there might be something which I need to be worried about here, or perhaps even be fearful about it here. And what it often leads to is search for more information, how serious this threat is. Does it exist? You are walking in the dark, you hear a sound, you start thinking that, do I need to be afraid, or was that just a normal sound? So there's the search for information, and then the effort to change your behavior according to the seriousness of the threat. And in this sense, what we've been calling together with Charlie, practical eco-anxiety is a highly adaptive and important emotion. It testifies that people observe threats related to ecological issues. It causes the need to search for more information. If people start acting constructively, it's even a so-called moral emotion related to doing right. But of course, there's a lot of things which can complicate the anxiety response. For example, a typical thing is that you start to search for more information online, then you end up doom scrolling for 5 hours, and then the end result might not be so constructive.
Yes, indeed. So there are many levels in anxiety as well. Why are eco emotions important?
Yes, so we can again distinguish different reasons here. One is the relation with morality and ethics, which I just mentioned. They may be related to questions of right and wrong. And Charlie uses an example of having a relative or a family member who is getting old. And there may be the anxiety that what should we do? Should we try to get more support structures, or should some relative move closer to him or her to support? And that's also an example of this moral anxiety. It's a good thing that the worry doesn't go away if the problem is real. So there's the morality part. Then there's also things related to well-being and functionality. And situations are different, but generally speaking, people would need recognition of their emotions and some kind of constructive ways to channel the energies in the emotions. That's another very major point, I think, that there's energy in emotions. The quality of that energy is quite different. For example, anger may more move you upwards, and sorrow or sadness may move you downwards, but all kinds of movements are needed in life. And if that doesn't happen, if you're just stuck with the energies, then that has bad impacts on your well-being and functionality. And usually then also indirectly, it affects your so-called pro-environmental behavior. So the link with environmental action or pro-environmental behavior is the third one. And lots of environmental psychology researchers have been especially interested about the second and third of these points. So the well-being / functionality point and the pro-environmental behavior point. So there's been efforts to study that, but it's been complex because anxiety is so complex. So there's the question that how do you measure these different forms of eco-anxiety and or climate anxiety, and what sort of things do you need to take into account?
Yes, and one thing that came to my mind when I think about the importance of eco emotions, for me as an eco-psychologist, I think like ecological emotions are a manifestation of our belongingness and our connectedness to the modern human community. So that is also what I want to bring up here.
Yeah, that's a very important point, and I would sort of recommend everyone who feels these emotions to appreciate just the fact that you are feeling them, even though it may be difficult, but it shows that you care and you realize some of the connections with what Juni is talking about.
Yes, and also you talk a lot about that maybe we could call the emotion not negative and positive, but rather something else. Why is this?
The terms positive emotions and negative emotions have been used a lot in psychology and other research, and a very basic interpretation would be that whether the emotion feels good or bad in general. And well, that's understandable, but unfortunately, often what happens in contemporary world is that people start to think that the emotions which feel good are the good, positive emotions. So it may be linked at a failure to understand the importance of the so-called negative emotions. And if we think about anger, for example, it's easy to notice situations where anger is problematic. You know, you get annoyed by something and you lash out, and hopefully later on you'll have the energy of guilt to help you to ask forgiveness and move on, and so on. But then constructive anger is very important because it's an energy which helps us to act against injustices. And then if we have a framework which sort of implies that negative emotions are not as good as the positive emotions, we miss out the importance of constructive anger, for example. And so there's sort of quite deep cultural layers oriented around positivity, which are at play here. And it's a bit difficult to use other terms because these are so commonly used, but I always try to use formulations like so-called positive emotions or so-called negative emotions.
Yes, and maybe like I've heard about like dark emotions or difficult emotions when it comes to like anger or grief, and then when it comes to the so-called positive emotions, maybe uplifting or something like this.
Yes, that's very close to the terms I've been using also. And well, language is a tool for communication, really, and well, a tool for beauty and delight also sometimes, but it never can be perfect, I think. And the formulation difficult emotions, I often use that, but then again, happiness may also be a difficult emotion in contemporary times because many people are having a hard time allowing themselves ever to be happy because there is so much injustice in the world, and because we are living in economic systems which are so intertwined with destructive ways towards the modern human world. So that's one part of this skills of ecological emotions would be to balance ecological guilt so that we also allow ourselves to feel joy and happiness, and even though that may be difficult sometimes. So this is a sort of broader point, but testifying to the challenge of the terminology.
Yes, indeed. You are really much the pioneer, one of the really pioneers of eco-emotion research, Panu, and I'm sure the audience would really much like to know, how did you end up doing research on eco-emotions?
Well, thanks for that. That's much appreciated. Even though we are always standing on the shoulders of giants, as the English saying goes roughly so. I've been deeply impacted, for example, by the work of Joanna Macy and colleagues in the work that reconnects movement, and that I warmly welcome to anyone. And they started doing those workshops already in the early 1980s. And then the threat of nuclear war and Cold War was one context and intertwined with ecological threats. And that's also a good example of why we don't need to do strict borders between various issues in the world. And the work that Reconnects movement calls it honoring our pain for the world. So it's not eco-emotions, even though that is much present, but it's a broader framing. But it took a long time from more mainstream psychology to catch up. In Britain, there were people writing about these themes like Rosemary Randall and Sally Weintraub, for example, and that was very helpful for me when I started to focus on this more after 2009, but then even more after January 2015, because I got my dissertation done in December 2014 and then decided that this is the topic I want to concentrate on. And to make it short, together with good colleagues in environmental education like Essi Arno Linnavuori, we noticed that people have many difficult emotions, now the term comes up, about ecological issues, and that these are almost never spoken about, at least in Finland around 2009. So that sparked a both practical interest and an academic interest, because we also realized that it would be very beneficial if we collectively could engage with these emotions.
Great, thanks. Now that we are in Youth and Environment Europe's event, of course, like eco-emotions really much also concern youth. So what would you say about the really recent research on eco-emotions, youth and mental health?
Yes, it's very clear that youth feel a lot of emotion related to the state of the world and future of the world. And there's probably many reasons for that. One is that when you are young, you are often more open to the state of the world, and people's sense of right and wrong is usually quite strong. When you grow up, and you know kids, when they play games, they are very strict that the rules have to be kept, so it's quite clear. And then when we grow up, we may get into all kinds of complications around when do the rules apply and when they don't, but anyway. And of course, the very fact that young people have the future ahead of them makes them highly concerned about what kind of future it will be. And what is intimately related is the question of political power also. And unfortunately, often young people don't get to decide politically. And one of the difficult dimensions of so-called eco-anxiety is the possible feelings of powerlessness and helplessness. Because often if we feel anxiety about a problem, there's something we can do to solve the problem. Well, that is to a degree the case in relation to the ecological crisis, but it's so big that this generation can't solve it. So it requires long time work trying to correct all these structures which are wrong. So that makes it challenging. We have to sort of be able to continue that work, and we have to notice that we can make changes and at the same time realize that we can't change everything. And then if you are a young person and you have even less power than the adults, it may feel even more distressing. So that's one big reason. And my dear colleague from Britain, Caroline Hickman, a psychotherapist and climate anxiety researcher, who also does private therapeutic practice, she often raises up the point that it's about trust also and feelings of betrayal. So she is convinced that one major dimension is the sense of betrayal to the adult world and to the decision makers. And sometimes the very ambivalent communication that, political leaders are saying that, yes, we care about the young generations, but then they fail to do climate politics. So that's probably one reason why it's so difficult for many young people. But then the positive side is that it galvanizes many young people to build community, to try to change things, and also to develop sources of meaning which are not so tied with material things.
Yes, and this topic of intergenerational justice is highly important and interesting, but we cannot, unfortunately, now dive any deeper to that. But let's go on with the to the more practical approach and tools. So you've been developing the tool called Climate Emotion Wheel. And also we have been using it in YEE's social media, for example. Can you tell us more about this tool and how it can be used?
Yes,
so here you can see the wheel.
Here it is, and big thanks to Anja Kamenets, who led the working group on this, and they found my research on climate emotions and invited me to join, and was happy to do so. So if you think about skills which are needed or beneficial in relation to eco-emotions or climate emotions, one is the ability to recognize what we are feeling, even roughly. It may be combinations of many feelings at the same time. You may feel both sadness, anger, and hope generally in relation to climate change, for example. But if we can find names for the emotions, that helps us even to react to the emotional energies. That's what psychological research tells us. It enables us to discuss about that emotion with others, and it enables us to search for information about what can be done if I feel this emotion. For example, then you find out that if you feel sad, it's usually a good thing to talk about that in a safe space with people who really understand, and doing some symbolic action is an ancient human practice, like lighting a candle, for example. So we can more easily find good practices if we notice what we are feeling. And the climate emotions wheel is a tool for this.
Yes, that's a really genius and easily approachable tool, I think. What would be some other tools regarding handling eco-emotions? What would you recommend?
In my research and public work during the last years, I've been working with so-called process model of eco-anxiety and grief. So trying to depict the process in a way which would be simple enough to understand, but not overly wrong. You know, there's the saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So that's the way it goes. And that model has in its heart coping and changing, which has 3 dimensions called action, grieving, including other emotional engagement, and thirdly, distancing, which can be healthy distancing, self-care and community care, or it can be sometimes problematic distancing. And it's also true that action is very important. It may help psychologically, but if you only act and act and act, then there's the danger of burnout. So if a person does any one of these 3 dimensions overly strongly, then there's the danger of strong distress or depression or burnout. So that's a very general tool to think about that. Do I make a difference or feel that I'm making a difference in some places? That's the action. Am I enough engaging with the emotions? And am I taking enough breaks also and taking care of resources? And lots of contextual factors shape this, so not everyone has the same opportunities, but that's a very broad tool to be used in relation to coping.
Yes, I really much recommend to everyone to look into the process model. It's really an amazing tool. And one thing that came to my mind also when it comes to facing and processing eco-emotions, art and creativity is for me at least, it's really important. And also there's an increasing amount of artworks and performances that are linked to eco-emotions. So yeah, what's on your mind, Panu, regarding this?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning. I think that's absolutely important and crucial. And emotions live in our body minds. So if we can find places where we can do something with our body mind and our body, that's usually helpful. And the arts can also help us to experience things which are difficult to name, for example. So personally also creativity and the arts are very important for me, and I've been glad about the increasing number of artists working on this, but just also recommending anyone to use any kind of creativity. So not just leaving to the official artists, but by doing that ourselves.
Yes, I think now our conversation, this first part is over and Q&A is starting. Thank you so much, Panu, for the discussion. Let's see what kind of questions we have gotten from the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Panu and Juni, for this very enlightening conversation. I'm very sorry to break you up, but we also have quite a few questions from the audience that we would also like to address in this conversation. So we've gotten some questions before this webinar from the audience, and we've also gotten some questions during. So I will ask a bit of both of them. So the first question I want to ask you, which I think you've also touched upon, with a feeling of powerlessness and hopefulness, and what do we do about it? So something that this really seems to resonate with our audience, and they're wondering, how do you personally keep hope for the future and your sanity whilst knowing the state of affairs and the predicament of climate change? So I will give the floor to you first, Panu, for this question, if you have any comments to this, and then Juni, you can go after, because I think this is a question that both of you can answer.
Yes, that's a big one. And the process model which I mentioned is called process model of eco anxiety and grief. And that's related to this question because I think that it is a kind of grief process. That one realizes that the world is changing in so many ways, that some of the changes are unavoidable, some we can have an influence on. So it generates a process what can be called reconstruction of meaning. That's a bit technical, but it's a term from grief research also. Robert Neymeyer and colleagues have done wonderful work in grief research on this meaning reconstruction. So, for example, speaking from personal experience, I grew up in the 1980s in an atmosphere where people thought that material progress can just, go on and on. There were some countercultural environmentalists, but not much where I was living, for example. So that's one quite powerful assumption which really has to change and has changed for many people. But you don't just change your assumptions in a short moment, but it requires a process. And in that process, it's possible to find new sources of meaning, or some older sources of meaning become more important. For example, it's very common that being together with others and interrelationality has been meaningful also before, but in our times, I think that the importance of it is growing even more. And that's related to this hope question also. So personally, being able to find meaning both in relations and in efforts to do something good for the world, that gives meaning, and that helps me to carry on regardless of my levels of optimism or pessimism. But what's on your mind, Juni?
I really much agree. I agree with you, and I don't know if I have anything worthwhile to add, but if I talk from a personal point of view, of course, connecting with human others and more than human others, appreciating the community that we are, regardless of how we view the world. We still are here together. We are interconnected. Just to realize this and to appreciate this, and to really also on the side of like, we of course want to make the world a better place. We want to act. I also consider myself an activist, but also just remembering to stop every now and then and building gratitude for all the beauty that and love that is still in the world around us and in us, celebrating this amazing, wonderful life, web of life that we are a part of. I think for me, those things are highly important.
Amazing, thank you. I think those were some very inspirational answers to a definitely very, very big question. I just want to remind your audience that you can still ask questions in the comment section on YouTube, and we will be looking at them. But we also actually got a question related to what you were talking about, Panu, eco-grief. Because someone in our audience is wondering what exactly is eco-grief, and do you have any useful resources to look this up, because they weren't so familiar with the term already, and they're wondering how they can learn more about this. So Panu, I will give the floor to you again, because you're the one talking about this, and then Juni, you can add anything if you want.
Yes, Juni has been leading creative workshops around eco-grief also, so she has knowledge about this also. This is one example where the coining the term ecological grief, environmental grief, then gives validation to feelings which exist. So on one hand, there's a lot of common in grief regardless of what is the topic. But then there are special features, and ecological grief is special. One reason is the global dimension. So much is changing and there's ongoing losses, so that gives it difficulty and weight. And then some other aspects also which make it different from classic cases of grief and bereavement, which means that a close person or perhaps a companion animal has died. So it's a longer process and it has more aspects. I did a large article last year called Ecological Sorrow, Types of Loss and Grief in Ecological Grief. So there's discussion of many dimensions of this. There can be anticipatory grief, there's a prediction that something will be lost. So that's one kind of grief, for example, and then non-finite or ongoing things. But there are also people working with this. One example is the Good Grief Network, born in the States. They run a peer-facilitated discussion group method. You can find that online. The work that Reconnects does workshops, and also several others like climate cafes, where people discuss climate grief and other emotions. So these are some of the keywords that can be looked for. And the poetic word of solastalgia, feeling homesickness while still living at home, desolation, solace, nostalgia, coined by Glenn Albrecht. So that's a powerful word which has resonated with many. How about you, Juni?
Yeah, indeed. I've held some workshops and lectures about also concerning eco-grief. And one of the latest workshops was actually in a seminar called Climate and Death. So there was a lot of talk about death as well. And we were holding with the Tunne ry colleagues, we were holding this workshop called Exploring Grief Through Embodiment and Collective Eco-Poetry. So we were really using those creative methods in the workshop. Just some practical tools how to handle grief maybe.
Amazing, thank you both of you. And I think the term of solastalgia, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but it's a very, very interesting term that covers feelings that we haven't really seen before, but that are uncovering in the state we are in now. So thank you for that. We have another question from the audience, and they're asking, how would you answer when fellow psychologists are skeptical of the legitimacy of eco-emotions? And whoever wants to take on that first, you can go.
You wanna start, Juni, this time?
Maybe I will give the floor to you first.
Yeah. We like ball games in Finland, so we throw the ball between persons. So the question is an important one, and the situations may be different. So, for example, if I'm doing some kind of educational event and some member of the audience challenges the legitimacy, then I do believe that I have the ethical responsibility to validate the reality of these feelings. Then if I'm sitting at a restaurant together with an old friend who is slightly skeptical of ecological issues, but also partly interested, and that's why he wants to raise up the conversation, then what I try to do, following the advice of psychologists, is to sort of roll with the resistance and try to ask questions that, you think so? Why is that? And then sort of finding out more what's behind that. And there may be an emotional need behind that skeptical question. It may be that there is actually quite a lot of fear, and that's hard to tolerate. So one defense mechanism against fear is to try to deny the issue. So what I'm saying here is that the types of communication also has a role here. In the Finnish public discussion, I've often been defending the legitimacy of eco-emotions precisely for those ethical reasons.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add to that, but yeah, I agree. Like really staying curious and compassionate towards different people, like different kind of views, creating bridges. That is the way we can kind of, yeah, that is holding on to our humanity and togetherness.
You had a lot to say in just a few phrases. Well,
Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And then I think we have time for one last question. We have quite a lot, but I think I will just pick one because we don't have time for more. And that is, what is the importance of differentiating climate emotions from regular emotional states?
yeah, if I start, so the validation and recognition issue is something, realizing that people have these also for ecological reasons. Of course, also realizing that what helps with the emotion in general may be helpful also in the ecological contexts. And for stronger anxiety states, some of the similar methods work, like, doing compassionate movements with your body, breathing exercises and that sort of thing. But also realizing that we can't just use mental reframing to get rid of eco-anxiety because the problem is real. So there's the similarities and also the differences. This is a very short answer, but we are sort of running out of time.
Yes, indeed. I think recognizing the emotions is really important, like what Panu said earlier as well, like in how we channel the emotions, and also about how we are really pondering our values and how we are realizing our values and how we are wanting to make a change in the world. So I think that's also why it's important to differentiate a bit between the different emotions.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that is a very good note to sadly start wrapping this conversation up on. I think we could talk about this topic forever. You're both so knowledgeable, and I think we could speak for hours about this topic. But we are running out of time, unfortunately. So I want to say thank you so much, Panu and Juni, for joining us today and sharing your very inspirational insights on the topics that we have been discussing. It's been such a pleasure to have you here. One last question is that I want to ask where people can follow you at and your work, and do you have any last share of resources before we say goodbye? And I know, Panu, you have a short selection of resources that you think are useful for people interested in this topic. So I will give the floor to you first and also ask the slides to be shared because there are some very nice resources there. So I'll give the floor to you, Panu, to share what you want about the resources you have in mind.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure discussing this, and always very rich to converse with you, Juni, and strongly resonating with the fundamental theme of empathy, compassion, and caring. So that's one of Caroline Hickman's phrases also, that eco-anxiety is fundamentally eco-empathy. Actually, it means that you care. So here's a guide to climate emotions, which I wrote together with very helpful comments from Anja Kamenets that came out last spring. It's available freely at the Climate Mental Health Network website. There's also an emoji version of the climate emotion wheel, so that can be used even with smaller children. And then if you press the next slide, please. This article, Open Access Toward a Taxonomy of Climate Emotions, is naming even more emotions and feelings than the wheel. And actually one of the activities with the wheel is to do your own wheel. That what do you recognize yourself? So you may be using also other emotion words. And you can move on to the next one, please. And this is the process model. Graphics by my old friend, reminding us of the old computer graphics. So you can find this process model also online. And I'm actually this year doing a sort of research results into public sphere project, and the Queer Brown Vegan social media account will be publishing more about this this autumn. So I do have an Instagram account, but I'm not hugely active. You can follow me there, please, if you want to, but also others are sharing the word. You can find me at LinkedIn also, and I try to do most of my research open access, so just the Google Scholar profile will give you that. But if you show the final slide, please. This is a provocatively titled podcast I'm running with Thomas Doherty, who is one of the forerunners in environmental psychology. So we want to poke at American happiness discourses and ask about what could be a good or meaningful life amidst the climate crisis. So that's perhaps the most accessible one. So thanks for the opportunity to share these resources also.
Thank you, Panu. And Panu's LinkedIn and Panu's Spotify podcast is also linked in the description below, so you can easily follow it. And we'll also make sure to send all these links to everyone that has participated. So then I just want to ask you, Juni, how people can stay up to date on your work. And you are also doing a regular column with YE, Ask the Experts. So maybe you can also say a few words about that.
Yes, I would really recommend everybody to follow YE's channels in social media and find out more also through the channels about eco-emotions. I'm also in Instagram, juni.rosa.natalia, and also in LinkedIn, so you can find some of my work and my activities there. But thank you so much, everybody, and thank you so much, Panu. Thank you, Hannah. It was a wonderful discussion.
No, thank you, Juni. And Juni's details are also linked in the description below. So you should all follow her. And like she said, we also have this regular column, Ask the Experts, in the coming weeks. So if you didn't get to ask your question during today's session, please feel free to ask it there, and Juni will be available to answer it. So then I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in, all of you. Thank you so much to Panu and Juni for joining our conversation on this very important topic. Thank you to the European Youth Foundation for supporting this project. And again, thank you for tuning in and wanting to spend your afternoon learning more about this topic. So that was all for today. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Good.